The mountain roads were quiet that Friday afternoon as I drove up toward my family's cabin tucked deep in the pines. I hadn't been there in weeks, and all I wanted was a weekend of peace, just me, the crackle of the fireplace, and the sound of wind whistling through the trees. But as soon as I rounded the final bend and my cabin came into view, my stomach dropped. Parked in my gravel driveway were two shiny SUVs and a sedan I didn't recognize. Even stranger, a bright white and blue real estate sign stood planted near the gate, angled proudly toward the road. It read in bold letters, "For sale, open house today." For a moment, I thought I'd lost my mind. I pulled up slowly, trying to make sense of it, but the shock only deepened when I saw people wandering casually across my porch. A couple stood by the railing, pointing toward the view of the lake below, while another group hovered near the front door, chatting with a woman in a blazer and heels who clutched a clipboard. My cabin, my family's cabin, looked like it had been turned into a real estate showcase without my knowledge. I slammed the truck door shut and marched forward. "Excuse me," I barked, startling the group. "What exactly are you doing on my property?" The woman in heels turned, all polite smiles, and extended her hand like this was some friendly encounter. "I'm Sarah, the listing agent. We're showing the cabin today. The HOA contacted me and said the property was available for sale." Her words hit me like a hammer. "The HOA? What are you talking about? This cabin isn't for sale. It's mine." The buyers exchanged confused glances, clearly uncomfortable. One of them, a man with a notepad, muttered, "Wait, you're the owner?" "Yes," I snapped, pulling my wallet from my pocket. "And here's my ID. If you need more proof, I've got the deed in my truck. This is private property. None of you should be here." But Sarah didn't back down. She adjusted her blazer and gave me a look that was half smug, half dismissive. "Well, according to the HOA president, this property falls under community management, and I was authorized to list it. If there's a mistake, you'll need to take it up with them." My blood boiled. Not only had the HOA trespassed on my land, but they were actively trying to sell it behind my back. I pointed toward the sign at the gate. "Take that down. Now, this cabin has been in my family for decades, and it's not going anywhere." The so-called buyers, realizing they had been duped, quickly shuffled back toward their cars, muttering about scams and wasted time. Sarah hesitated, then huffed as she grabbed her phone, no doubt preparing to call Karen, the HOA president. I didn't give her the chance. I ripped the sign from the ground myself, tossed it onto the gravel, and glared at her. "Let me make this crystal clear," I said, my voice low and steady. "The HOA has zero authority here. This land belongs to me. If you or anyone else comes back without my permission, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." For the first time, her confident mask cracked. She muttered something about miscommunication and rushed off to her car. Within minutes, the driveway was empty, leaving me standing there with the broken sign at my feet. As the silence of the mountains settled back in, I realized something important. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate move by the HOA to muscle me out of my own property. They thought they could intimidate me, confuse the law, and maybe even trick someone into buying what wasn't theirs to sell. But they underestimated one thing: my resolve. That night, as I sat in the cabin by the fire, I stared into the flames and made a promise. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. And I wasn't just going to defend my property, I was going to make sure they regretted ever touching it. The next morning, I woke up with one thing on my mind. If the HOA thought they could waltz onto my land and parade strangers through my cabin, I needed to make sure it never happened again. I drove down to the hardware store in town, bought a heavy-duty steel gate industrial-grade chains, and a padlock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. By noon, I was back at the cabin with my truck full of supplies. The sound of metal clanging and drills echoing across the valley was strangely satisfying. Each bolt I drove into the posts felt like staking a claim not just to the cabin, but to my family's legacy. This land was ours, always had been, and now I was putting up a wall no HOA busybody could push past. When the gate was finished, I took out the bright red and white sign I'd had made at the print shop: "Private property, not for sale. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I fastened it dead center where no one could miss it. For good measure, I added another smaller one that simply read, HOA not welcome. As I admired my work, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Sure enough, here came Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, pulling up in her oversized SUV. She didn't even bother parking properly, just angled her vehicle across the road as if she owned it. The moment she saw the gate, her face twisted with outrage. She stormed out, heels clicking furiously against the dirt, and marched straight up to the barrier. What is the meaning of this? She barked, gripping the bars as if she could rip them down by sheer will. You can't put up a gate here. This is community access. The HOA has every right to manage this property. I almost laughed at the audacity. Community access? This cabin has never been under HOA control. It's private property and you know it. The deed is in my name, and I'll be happy to show it to you again. Karen's face flushed crimson. You're in violation of community standards. The board voted to make this property available for sale, and you can't just decide to block us out. Oh, I can, I said firmly, resting my hand on the lock. And I did. You had no right to list my cabin or invite strangers onto my land. That little stunt yesterday was fraud. Karen, do you know what happens when people commit fraud? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She tried to regain control, pointing a manicured finger at me. The HOA will fine you thousands of dollars if you don't remove this gate immediately. That's when I pulled out the property survey I'd retrieved from the county office. I unfolded the large paper, pressed it against the bars so she could see, and tapped the boundary line. You see this? Not only does this cabin sit outside of your HOA jurisdiction, but half of those so-called community trails you've been bragging about, they cut straight through my property, which means the only one getting fined here is you for trespassing. Her mouth fell open. She stammered, searching for words, but none came. For the first time, Karen looked genuinely rattled. She wasn't used to anyone standing up to her, let alone shutting her down with legal documents. I leaned in close enough for her to see the conviction in my eyes. From now on, if I catch one HOA member on my land without permission, I'll have the sheriff waiting with trespass citations. And if you so much as mention my cabin being for sale again, I'll sue the entire board for fraud. Karen's face twisted into a mask of rage and humiliation. She snapped a picture of the gate with her phone, muttering about reporting this, then stomped back to her SUV. She peeled away, so fast dust covered the sign I'd just hung. As the gravel settled, I smiled to myself. The HOA thought they had me cornered, but they didn't realize I had just flipped the board. They weren't locking me out, I was locking them out. And from now on, they'd learn what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. The morning sun cut through the mist as I drove up the winding path toward my cabin, my truck rumbling with quiet determination. The night before, I had stayed up late designing the boldest, most undeniable message the HOA could ever receive. I had hired a local craftsman to carve a massive wooden sign, larger than any flimsy for sale board the realtor had tried to plant on my land. As I pulled up, I saw a few cars parked outside the gate, HOA board members and the same slick-haired realtor, all huddled together with clipboards and fake smiles. They looked like vultures circling, waiting for me to roll over and give up what was mine. Instead, I stepped out, dusted off my jeans, and swung the gate wide open. "Morning," I said calmly, carrying the sign under my arm like a soldier carrying his flag into battle. The president, Mrs. Allen, was the first to speak. Her shrill voice cut through the air, dripping with arrogance. "You're trespassing on HOA property. We've already authorized an inspection, and you are interfering with official business." The others nodded, puffing themselves up like they had legal authority, as if I was the outsider here. The realtor smirked, phone in hand, probably dialing potential buyers behind my back. That was the last straw. I walked right past them, dropped the massive sign into the dirt at the gate, and hammered it into the ground with 3 strong swings. The words burned bold across it. "Private property, not for sale. Trespassers will be fined." Every letter was sharp, every stroke permanent. When I stood back, I saw their faces drain. For the first time, they realized they weren't in control. Mrs. Allen's voice cracked with rage as she pointed at the sign. You can't do this. You don't have the authority. This is HOA managed land, and we decide what happens here. Her words fell flat as I pulled out the folder I had been waiting to reveal. Inside was the deed, stamped and notarized, proving beyond question that the land, the cabin, and every inch of the surrounding property belonged solely to me. I held it up in the sunlight, like a weapon, letting them read every official seal. The realtor took a nervous step back, muttering that he hadn't known the details, but Mrs. Allen wasn't backing down. She grabbed her phone, threatening to call the sheriff. I just smiled and leaned against the gate. Go ahead, I told her, because when they show up, they'll see what I see. An HOA trying to sell property they don't own. That's called fraud, and you're standing right in the middle of it. It was almost comical how quickly the tone shifted. One board member suddenly found a reason to leave, muttering about a prior commitment. Another tried to apologize, claiming they just followed orders. Even the realtor, red-faced and embarrassed, packed up his folder and disappeared down the trail without so much as a handshake. But Mrs. Allen stayed, trembling with fury, refusing to admit defeat. This isn't over, she hissed. We'll file complaints. We'll bury you in fines. You'll regret this. I walked up close enough for her to see the iron in my eyes and pointed at the sign now planted firm in the ground. The only thing buried here is your scam, I said evenly. From this day forward, the only signs on this land are mine, and the only fines being issued are for trespassing on my property. That was the breaking point. She stormed off in a rage, her heels crunching the gravel. But she knew it was done. The HOA had been exposed for what they were, bullies trying to profit off what they didn't own. As I stood there, watching them scatter like shadows at sunrise, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The cabin behind me wasn't just a home anymore. It was proof that when you stand your ground, the truth always cuts deeper than any lie. I leaned on the gate one last time, looking at the bold letters of the sign, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in months, the land felt quiet, safe, and truly mine again.